I remember that night as if it had been carved into my bones. Austin, Texas. The city that had seemed so far from my world in the Persian Gulf suddenly felt closer than the breath in my lungs. My daughter, Samira, was there, pursuing the education I had fought to give her. 2 years of study in environmental engineering, far from home, far from my watchful eyes, but never far from my heart. It was early June. The evening air in my home was warm and still, the only sound the gentle hum of the ceiling fan in my study. I had just finished the last prayer of the day when the phone rang. Seeing her name on the screen, I answered immediately. Her voice came fast, almost breathless. "Dad, it's raining too hard. The campus is flooding. The police are telling us to move to the upper floors." The line went dead. At first, I thought it was a poor signal. I called back. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. The signal icon on my phone was blank. My stomach tightened. I refreshed news feeds, sent messages to mutual acquaintances in the States, even called the embassy. My hands were already trembling before I turned on the television. That's when I saw it. Aerial footage on CNN. The flood had swallowed large parts of Austin. Roads were rivers. Cars bobbed like toys. Then the camera moved over a familiar set of brick buildings surrounded by torrents of water. My breath caught in my chest. The campus. Her campus. For 30 years, I had carried the authority of an imam. I had preached in mosques, counseled the grieving, guided the young. My voice had been steady in funerals and storms. But that night, as I stared at the image of Samira's university cut off from the world, my voice failed me completely. I reached for the phone again, dialing without thinking, only to hear the same hollow silence. I tried a contact in Houston, another in Dallas, nothing. The networks were jammed. My mind went where it should not go. I imagined her clinging to something in the dark, the cold water rising, her voice calling for me, not knowing I could not reach her. A knot of fear settled in my stomach, not the kind you can push away with reason or faith. This was raw, primal, father's fear. The house around me was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The rain outside my window was soft, nothing like what I saw on the television. It felt cruel that my world could be calm while hers might be ending. I paced between the study and the living room, phone in one hand, the remote in the other, switching between news channels like a madman. Every few minutes, they'd show the same aerial shot. The campus, the surrounding streets, the flood swallowing everything. It was past midnight when the weight of it began to crush me. I fell to my knees on the living room carpet, the one where I had prayed countless times before. I opened my mouth to recite the verses I had known since childhood, verses I had led others in so many times. But nothing came. The words evaporated before they reached my tongue. I tried again, forcing the rhythm, the form, the order, but it was as if my voice had been stolen. My hands trembled, my chest burned. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. This was not how an imam was supposed to pray. I pressed my forehead to the carpet, trying to find the connection I had always claimed was unshakable. But that night, the heavens felt locked. My words felt like stones dropping into an endless well. I lifted my head, sat back on my heels, and whispered, "Samira." It was the only word that didn't feel empty. The hours blurred after that. News anchors spoke of death tolls rising, of rescue boats being deployed, of emergency calls flooding 911. But none of those voices mattered. I needed one voice, hers, and it was nowhere to be found. I thought of my late wife, how she would have been kneeling beside me, whispering her own pleas. Samira was the last living piece of her. The thought that I might lose her made my chest ache until I thought I'd collapse. I stood, walked to my study, and reached for the high shelf where I kept my old Quran. I set it before me, opened it, and tried again. Tried to be the imam I had been for 3 decades. Tried to be the man who knew exactly what to say to God. But my lips felt heavy. My voice would not rise. I don't know what broke in me then. Pride, certainty, the illusion of control. But in the silence, I heard myself whisper something I never imagined I would say. If there is someone listening beyond what I know, please save my daughter. even if I must meet the one I have denied all my life. The words were clumsy, unplanned, but they were real. For the first time in my life, I prayed without a script, without tradition, without the armor of doctrine. Just a father on the floor, in the dark, pleading for mercy. I stayed like that until exhaustion overtook me. At some point, my body folded into sleep, my cheek still pressed to the carpet. I did not know then that those words, simple, desperate, almost accidental, would open a door I had spent my whole life locking. Before that night in Austin, my life had been one of order, discipline, and certainty. My name is Imran Khalidi, and for 3 decades I served as imam in a respected community on the shores of the Persian Gulf. It was a role I had inherited not by bloodline, but by devotion and relentless study. From the moment I first stood before a congregation, I carried the weight of that title like a badge and a shield. My days were predictable: the rhythm of prayers, the recitation of the Quran, the quiet counsel of those who came seeking advice. I was known for my uncompromising stance on matters of faith. I believed there was only one truth, and I defended it fiercely. Christians, in particular, were a group I saw as misguided at best, dangerous at worst. I preached against their teachings, warned against the errors of the cross, and saw myself as a guardian protecting my people from deception. Outside the mosque, I was a man who kept to a tight circle. My wife, Layla, had been my closest companion, my confidant, and my anchor. We married young, and she bore me one child, our daughter Samira. When Layla died unexpectedly, I was left with a grief that cut deep and a responsibility I could not share. Samira became my reason to rise in the morning and the last thought before I slept. I raised her with a mixture of affection and rigidity. Affection, because she reminded me of her mother's smile. Rigidity, because I believed the world outside our faith was a raging current, ready to pull her under if I loosened my grip. I monitored her friends, her studies, her manners, even the tone in her voice when she spoke of other beliefs. When she received a scholarship to study environmental engineering in Austin, Texas, my first instinct was to refuse. The West was a place I had warned against for years, but the opportunity was too great, and the scholarship had come after long negotiations and favors pulled from friends of influence. I told myself it would be temporary, that she would remain disciplined, that distance would not break the chain of my oversight. Even across oceans and time zones, I kept her on a tight leash. I called every day, sometimes twice, checking if she had prayed, if she was fasting during Ramadan, if she was avoiding gatherings I would disapprove of. To her credit, Samira answered every call with patience, never raising her voice, never cutting me short. She would tell me about her classes, the strange Texan weather, the food she missed from home. But I also heard something else in her tone, something I could not quite name, a softness that seemed to grow with each month abroad. I ignored it. In my community, my authority was rarely questioned. Men twice my age would lower their gaze when I spoke. I delivered sermons with confidence, even zeal, believing I was shaping not just lives, but eternal destinies. People came to me for blessings before marriage, for counsel in business disputes, for comfort in illness. I believed my life was in service to God as I understood Him, and that my path was fixed and righteous. It is strange, looking back now, how solid it all felt, as if the foundation of my life were carved from stone. I never considered that it could be shaken, let alone broken. I kept my days busy, my nights quiet. When the call to prayer echoed through the neighborhood, I would lead with steady hands, never allowing my voice to waver. I took pride in my discipline, in my ability to keep my emotions contained. My faith was something I carried like a fortress wall, tall, strong, impenetrable, but even a fortress can hide cracks. In private moments, when the mosque was empty and the house silent, I sometimes caught myself thinking of Layla's last days. She had been a woman of gentle faith, never confrontational, never proud of her devotion. I used to think she lacked conviction. Now I wonder if she had something I didn't, a peace I could not name. Samira inherited that quietness. Even when I pressed her about her studies or her routines, she never met me with rebellion. She agreed, nodded, promised. But there was always that flicker in her eyes, the one I thought was mere youth. Now I see it was something deeper. Austin was far, too far for my comfort, but I told myself that her discipline would hold, that the rules I had set would bind her even across oceans. I believed that my voice, in daily calls, could anchor her in place. It was in that belief that I lived, certain that my role as her father and as an imam was enough to shield her from anything the world might throw at her. And so life continued in its rhythm. Morning prayers, counsel in the mosque, evenings with my books, calls to Samira, visits to the homes of community members, sermons on Fridays. Nothing in my days hinted that a storm was coming. Not the one over Texas, nor the one that would tear through my own soul. Looking back, I realize how blind I was to the fragility of the walls I had built around my life. I thought they were high enough to keep the world out. I thought I could protect Samira simply by will and distance. But storms do not ask permission to enter. And when they come, they do not knock, they break the door. When the call from Samira ended so abruptly that night, it was as though someone had pulled the ground from beneath my feet. I stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, staring at the blank screen as if my will alone could force her voice back through it. I called again. No signal. Again. Still nothing. I sent messages that remained undelivered. My mind told me there were explanations, the rain, the network, the chaos. But my chest knew something else. She was in danger. I moved to the television, flipping between news channels, trying to find any mention of Austin. I didn't have to wait long. CNN's footage showed streets I recognized from her photos turned into rushing brown rivers. Cars were submerged to their roofs. Helicopters circled overhead like vultures, their spotlights cutting pale circles into the dark water. And then I saw it, the camera swept over her campus. I knew those buildings. I had studied them on maps before she left, wanting to know every road, every entrance. Now they were surrounded by floodwater, like islands cut off from the world. It felt as if the air had been punched out of me. In my life as a mom, I had sat with fathers who had lost children, with mothers whose sons never came home. I had prayed over coffins, whispered verses over graves. I had been the one to speak strength into those whose hearts were breaking. But in that moment, I realized I had never truly understood their pain. Now it was my turn to taste it. I picked up the phone again, dialing numbers at random, friends of friends in Texas, community contacts, anyone who might have a thread of information. Nothing. Everyone was as in the dark as I was. The rain outside my own home in the Persian Gulf was soft, almost mocking in its gentleness. How could it be so calm here while she was fighting for her life there? I returned to the living room and dropped to my knees on the carpet. The same carpet where I had prayed 5 times a day for decades. My hands rested on my thighs, palms up, the posture familiar. I opened my mouth to begin the prayer I had recited since childhood. Nothing came. I tried again. The rhythm I had repeated so many times in my life felt foreign, distant, hollow. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, almost frantic. I told myself to focus, to remember the words, to do what I had done for years without thought. But each verse felt like dry leaves in my mouth. They crumbled before they could form into something alive. I lowered my forehead to the carpet, forcing the posture, as if the physical act might make the words return. I whispered the opening lines, but my voice faltered. I felt a strange emptiness. Not just silence from God, but a wall. A wall I could not see, only feel, blocking every syllable, every attempt to reach beyond myself. My hands began to shake. I pressed my palms into the carpet to steady them. My chest was tight, as though a weight had been laid across it. The fear was no longer just about Samira. It was about me, about the realization that I, the man who had guided others in faith, had no words left that felt real. I sat back on my heels, staring at the dim room. The only light came from the television screen, flashing images of helicopters, boats, crying faces. And then, without planning it, without thinking of doctrine or consequence, I said aloud, "If there is someone listening beyond what I know, please, save my daughter." even if I must meet the one I have denied all my life. The words surprised me as much as if someone else had spoken them. It was not a theological statement. It was not the careful phrasing of an imam versed in religious debates. It was raw, unshaped, the plea of a father stripped bare. I stayed there for hours. Sometimes I whispered her name, sometimes nothing at all. My knees ached, my back stiffened, but I could not bring myself to rise. Eventually, exhaustion took me. My body slid sideways onto the carpet, cheek pressed against its familiar weave. I remember thinking how strange it was to fall asleep there, in the place I had always met God on my own terms. This time, I had no terms left. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the surrender, the willingness to cry out to a God I had never acknowledged, would change everything. In that darkness, the fortress I had built over decades began to crack. I did not yet see the light that would come through, but the breaking had started, and the storm in Austin raged on. I don't remember the exact moment I fell asleep on that carpet. One moment, I was whispering Samira's name into the silence. The next, the weight of exhaustion pulled me under. When my eyes opened, I wasn't sure if I was awake or dreaming. The room looked the same shelves of books, the same old rug beneath me. But there was a strange glow seeping in through the window. It wasn't the soft yellow of the streetlight outside, nor the harsh glare of the sun. It was different. I pushed myself up, heart pounding. My first thought was that maybe the power had returned in the neighborhood, and the light was from outside. But as I turned toward the door of the room, I froze. A man was standing there. He wore a simple white robe, the kind we wore on holy days, but without embroidery, without ornament. His presence filled the doorway, not with sighs, but with something I could not name, a weight, a stillness. And his eyes, I have lived long enough to see every kind of gaze. The prideful, the weary, the bitter, the joyful. But his eyes were none of these. They were not merely beautiful. They were piercing, as though they could see through the walls I had built inside myself. I wanted to speak, to demand who he was, how he had entered my home without a sound. But no words came. Strangely, I felt no fear, only a deep awareness that I was in the presence of someone unlike anything I had known. He did not move toward me. He simply stood there, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed yet unshakable. When he spoke, his voice was calm, without accent, without effort. "You called me and I came. Your daughter will live. But now it is your soul that needs saving." The words seemed to settle into the air, not rushing, not lingering, just being. I could not answer. My mouth was dry, my chest tight. I tried to speak, but the weight of his presence pinned my voice inside me. There was no anger in his tone, no accusation, only certainty, as if he were stating a truth that could not be changed. Before I could gather myself, he turned. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He walked toward the doorway, stepped through it, and was gone. The room was silent again. The glow faded. For a moment, I stayed frozen where I was, my hands gripping my knees. Then my breathing returned in short, uneven bursts. I rose to my feet, legs trembling, and moved to the doorway. Empty. I searched the house, opening doors, checking windows, looking for signs that someone had entered. Nothing was out of place, nothing disturbed, and yet everything was different. I went to the window and looked outside. The night was still deep, the sky black and starless. No sign of the strange light that had filled the room moments ago. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to decide if I had lost my mind. Was it a dream born of exhaustion and fear? Was it the fevered imagination of a man desperate to believe his daughter would live? But in my heart, the same heart that had resisted softness for years, I knew it had been real. I could still feel the calm in his presence, still hear the exact timbre of his voice. And the words refused to leave me. "You called me and I came." I repeated them under my breath, again and again, as if they were a rope keeping me from sinking. When dawn finally came, I moved to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection stared back at me. The same beard, the same tired eyes, but something was off. I could not name it, but it was as though something had been stripped away inside me, and in its place was space. A space I could not fill with doctrine, not anymore. I returned to the living room and turned on the television. The flood coverage was still everywhere. Helicopters skimming rooftops, boats weaving through streets, people standing on balconies waving for help. The numbers of the dead were climbing. Every time my heart began to sink, I would hear it again. Your daughter will live. Hours passed. The phone lay silent on the table beside me. I didn't know if I wanted it to ring or feared what news it might bring. And then, in the quiet, it vibrated. I grabbed it so quickly my fingers nearly dropped it. The number on the screen was foreign, an American number I didn't recognize. I answered without hesitation. A woman's voice, bright with relief, introduced herself as the coordinator of a volunteer rescue team connected to a local church. She explained they had reached a flooded section of the campus and found several students trapped in a classroom. Among them was Samira, alive. My knees buckled. I gripped the arm of the sofa to steady myself as she went on, telling me Samira was weak but conscious, that she had been pulled from the water by young men who had formed a human chain. And then the woman hesitated, as if unsure whether to say what came next. Before she lost consciousness, she said, "Your daughter told one of the rescuers. Jesus was with me. He held my hand." I didn't answer, couldn't. My throat closed, my vision blurred. I sank to the carpet, the same carpet where hours earlier I had whispered a desperate prayer into the darkness. The man in white, the words he spoke, my daughter's voice repeating the same truth from across an ocean. This was no coincidence. I don't remember dropping the phone, but I must have, because when my hearing returned, it was lying beside me on the carpet, the woman's voice still faint through the speaker. I pressed it back to my ear, murmured something, thanks, a prayer, I don't know which, and promised to call her back. Alive. My daughter was alive. The words felt unreal in my mouth, like something borrowed from another man's joy. I stayed kneeling, my palms flat against the carpet, my forehead bent low. I wanted to shout, to weep, to run through the streets, but all I could do was whisper her name over and over. Samira. For hours, I had been staring at death through a television screen. Now, life had been handed back to me, and not just life wrapped in a miracle. When the call ended, I sat in silence, replaying the woman's words in my mind. Jesus was with me. He held my hand. I closed my eyes, and there he was again, the man in white standing in my doorway, those eyes that seemed to see straight into me. You called me, and I came. Your daughter will live. I am not a man easily given to superstition. My years as imam had taught me to be skeptical of anything that smelled of embellishment or mysticism. But this was not a tale told by another. This was my life, my home, my daughter, my prayer. And the echo of his words was too precise to dismiss. I needed to hear her voice. Hours later, how many? I couldn't say. The phone rang again. This time, the number was familiar. I answered so quickly that my voice cracked. It was not Samira herself, but a nurse at a local clinic in Austin where the rescued students had been taken. She told me my daughter was stable, though exhausted and dehydrated. I asked if I could speak to her, but the nurse explained she was sleeping. I almost insisted, but something in me said to wait, let her rest. So I waited. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, the Quran still on the table, my thoughts circling like restless birds. I wasn't sure what I was anymore. Imam? Father? Madman? All I knew was that my daughter had spoken words I never imagined would pass her lips. Morning came. My body ached, but I barely noticed. The television droned in the background, showing images of rescue boats ferrying students and staff to safety. Somewhere in those crowds had been Samira, and I had missed seeing her by a matter of hours. By mid-morning, the call came. Her voice was faint but steady. Dad. I closed my eyes at the sound. Samira, my daughter, are you all right? I'm tired, she said. But yes, I'm okay. We were trapped in a classroom. The water kept rising. We pushed tables together and tried to climb up, but it didn't help much. It was so dark when the power went out. I swallowed hard. I could picture it. My daughter surrounded by water, clinging to hope with her bare hands. There was a moment, she continued, when I thought it was over. I prayed, but not like I used to. I didn't recite. I just spoke. I told God I was afraid. And then he was there. I almost stopped breathing. A man, she said softly, in white. He was standing in the water, but somehow not touched by it. There was light around him, even though it was pitch dark. He came to me, held out his hand, and said, "Your father prayed, and I came for you." The phone trembled in my hand. I turned my face away from the room, as if hiding from the truth I already knew. "Dad." "I knew it was him," she whispered. "I knew it was Jesus." My voice failed me. All I could do was grip the phone until my knuckles ached. She told me how, moments after his words, she heard shouts from the hallway. Rescuers had reached the building. They broke the door open, and she was pulled into the arms of a young man who carried her out into the floodwaters. She fainted soon after. I listened in silence, each word fitting like a piece in a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. The man in my room, the words he spoke. The man in her classroom, the words he spoke. They were the same presence, the same promise. When she finished, there was a pause between us. Neither of us knew what to say. Finally, I found my voice. "Samira." I saw him too. She didn't gasp or question. She simply said, "I know." Something inside me broke again, but this time it wasn't fear or pride. It was the weight of knowing we had shared a miracle across an ocean. We spoke a little longer. About her health, the friends she was worried about, the church volunteers who had fed and clothed them. But the conversation kept circling back, silently, to that moment in the water, and to the man we had both seen. When we ended the call, I sat in the stillness of my living room. The prayer rug lay where I had left it. The bookshelves stood as they had for years. The world looked unchanged, but inside nothing was the same. I knew then that my life could not return to what it had been. In the days after the flood, I moved through life like a shadow. Outwardly, I was still Imam Imran Khalidi of the Persian Gulf, attending prayers, delivering sermons, offering counsel to my community. But inside, the man who had stood on those carpets for 30 years was gone. I could still feel the eyes of the man in white, still hear his voice, still remember the certainty in his words. "Your daughter will live. But now it is your soul that needs saving." At night, I began locking myself in my study long after the house was silent. On the highest shelf was an old Bible I had kept for apologetic purposes, to study my opponent's arguments so I could dismantle them in debate. I had never read it with an open heart. Now my hands trembled as I opened it. I told myself I was just curious, that I was searching for the story Samira had unknowingly lived. The story of a man's daughter healed from a distance by faith alone. But as I read, I found more than I expected. These were not the words of an enemy. They were words that cut and healed at the same time. I did not tell anyone. Not my friends at the mosque. Not the elders. Certainly not my family. If they knew, the consequences would be more than social, they could be fatal. It was Samira herself who made the decision for me. Days after our first conversation, she called again. Her voice was stronger, but her words carried the same quiet certainty I had heard in Austin's floodwaters. "Dad," she said, "I'm safe now. The church people who rescued us found me a place to stay. They've been kind. They don't push anything, but I know you'll come." The air left my lungs. "Samira, I know you'll come," she said again. "He told me you would." That night, I bought a ticket to the United States. I told no one. I traveled light with a single backpack, my documents, and clothes simple enough not to draw attention. Every layover felt like a risk. Every immigration officer's glance felt like a question I couldn't answer. When I stepped off the plane in Austin, the air hit me with its warmth and humidity. I stood for a moment in the terminal, unsure whether to move or just breathe. It was the first time in decades that I had set foot outside the world that had shaped me. A taxi took me to an address on the outskirts of the city. The driver chatted about the flood, the destruction, the volunteers, the recovery efforts, but I barely heard him. My heart was pounding too loudly. The house was small, wooden, with a porch and a modest garden. A simple cross hung beside the front door. I knocked. When the door opened, Samira stood there. Her eyes filled with tears before she even spoke. In an instant, she was in my arms, clinging to me with a strength that nearly knocked me over. My own tears came freely, unrestrained by pride or title. For a long time, we said nothing. We simply stood there, father and daughter, holding on as if to prove we had both survived. Inside, the house was quiet. A single woman, older, with kind eyes, greeted me. "Welcome, brother," she said softly. "My name is Miriam." She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. She simply set down a tray of tea and left us alone. We sat on the porch as the afternoon sun sank low. I asked her to tell me everything, from the moment the water began to rise until the rescuers pulled her out. She spoke slowly, sometimes pausing as if the memories were heavy to carry. She described the cold water climbing the walls, the darkness when the lights failed, the panic in the voices around her. And then, she said, the stillness, as if the entire room had stopped moving. "The man in white was there," she said. "Not like the rescuers, not like anyone I've ever seen. There was light around him, but no one else seemed to notice. He came straight to me, held out his hand and said, 'Your father prayed, and I came for you.'" My breath caught. The exact words. "I knew it was him," she said. "I knew it was Jesus." We sat in silence for a long time. I didn't need to tell her that I had seen him too. She already knew. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever lived. We stayed inside the house, avoiding visitors. We prayed, sometimes in silence, sometimes aloud. We opened the Bible together, reading without the intent to debate or defend, but simply to understand. There was no argument between us, no resistance. Just two souls who had seen the same miracle trying to walk toward its light. And yet there was fear, not of the man in white, not of what we had seen, but of what it would mean if the world knew. For me, returning to the Persian Gulf would mean facing charges of apostasy or worse. For Samira, it would mean being cut off entirely from the life she had known. One night, as we read by the dim light of a single lamp, she looked at me and said, "Dad, do you believe you were saved too?" I stared at the pages before me, the words blurring. "I can't explain what happened," I said, "but I know I will never be the same again, and if this is salvation, then yes, I have been reached." Her eyes glistened, and she reached across the table to take my hand. We sat like that for a while, the lamp casting our shadows long against the wall. I knew even then that there was no going back. It has been months since the flood in Austin, but I still wake each morning with the feeling that I am not the man I once was. In the Persian Gulf, my days had been shaped by duty, tradition, and a title that defined me, Imam. Here, in this quiet corner of America, my life has been stripped bare of those things. And strangely, I do not mourn their loss. I no longer lead congregations. No one waits for me to deliver sermons. My phone no longer rings with invitations to speak at weddings or funerals. In the eyes of my old world, I have vanished. But in the eyes of my daughter, I am more present than I have ever been. Samira has settled into her studies again, though now she attends a different university, far from the floodwaters and the memories they hold. She laughs more easily. She moves with a lightness that reminds me of her mother in the early years of our marriage. And when she reads the Gospels aloud in the evenings, her voice carries a warmth that draws me to listen. Even when my mind is weary, I still wrestle with guilt. Guilt for the sermons I once preached, condemning those who now call me brother without hesitation. Guilt for the walls I built between myself and anyone who did not share my beliefs. Guilt for using the name of God to guard my own pride. But guilt is no longer my master. Here, in this small apartment we now call home, I am learning something I never understood before. That love is not weakness, and humility is not defeat. Some days, I walk past a small brick church not far from here. Its doors are often open, the sound of soft hymns drifting into the street. I have never stepped inside. Not because I do not want to, but because I know that crossing that threshold will mark another turning point in a journey I am still taking one step at a time. Instead, I sit on the bench outside. I watch the light filter through the stained glass. I close my eyes and remember the calm in his gaze, the firmness in his voice. You called me and I came. There are nights when I wake in the dark, the old fears trying to creep back in. The fear of what I left behind, the fear of what might come if the truth were known. But then I hear her breathing softly in the next room, and I know it was worth it. I left the Persian Gulf without fanfare, without farewells. To my community I disappeared. If they ever learn the truth, that I have turned my heart toward the man in white, they will call me traitor. Some will call for my death. But the truth is no longer a burden I can hide from. It has become the air I breathe. I have met others here, quiet men and women from places like mine, who carry the same secret. Some fled violence. Others were disowned. Each one carries a story of being found in the darkness, of a hand reaching out when there was no hope left. It reminds me that what happened in Austin was not just about me, or even about Samira. It was about a God who still comes when called, even by those who do not yet know his name. I think often about that night on my living room carpet, the way my own prayers failed me, the way desperation stripped away every layer of pride. I did not call him Lord. I did not recite a creed. I simply cried out for my daughter, and he came, not because I had earned it, not because I had the right words, but because mercy does not wait for perfection. If you had told me a year ago that I would be here, telling this story, I would have called you mad. An imam from the Persian Gulf seeing Jesus in his home? A devout Muslim's daughter rescued by strangers, claiming that same Jesus held her hand? Impossible. And yet, it happened. It happened so clearly that no amount of denial could erase it. I am not here to argue theology. I am not here to prove anyone wrong. I am here because I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know who answered me in the darkest hour of my life. And I know that I cannot go back. So I speak now to whoever will listen. Do not wait until the waters rise. Do not wait until the darkness closes in. Do not wait until your own strength fails you. Call out to him. Even if you don't yet know his name, call out. Because when you do, you may hear the same words I did. You called me and I came. And when he comes, nothing in your life will ever be the same again. My call to you is this: return to the Gospels. Return to the truth. Return to the Christ who still walks into flooded rooms and frightened hearts. I am a man who once built walls against him, and now I find my only refuge is in him. If you hear my voice, take this as your sign. Do not turn away. The one who came for me and my daughter is not far from you either. That is how I live now, quietly, without titles, without the weight of a pulpit. I am simply Imran Khalidi, a father who found grace in the middle of a storm. And when my final day comes, I will not fear, because I will remember the night he came, and I will know he will come for me again.